Thank everybody for joining me on this live training today. My name is Anthony Taylor. I'm the principal consultant at SME Strategy, and today we'll be going over best practices for identifying strategic priorities. So I'm really excited about this topic. Last webinar we talked about the strategic planning process as a whole. And then after asking a lot of our readers and all of our subscribers what they wanted to hear, one of the things that came up was best practices on how to identify strategic priorities, how to move forward with a team and get alignment, and how to move forward. Thank you, Patrick. So without any further ado, let's get going. So why do strategic planning at all? It's helpful, if not imperative, to focus your resources on the things that are going to have the most impact on your organization. In addition, it gives your team a sense of purpose and a direction, and I'll talk more about staff in a moment. And it's not to be surprised from or suffer from unexpected things, because organization, you run your organization, but then it operates in its silo, but in a bigger sphere of competition, of external events, and everything else. So strategic planning is a way to mitigate risks and increase opportunities and success from opportunities as you move forward. So here's some of the learning outcomes that I want to be able to share today. Okay, so to be able to identify the best alternatives for you and your team as part of your strategic plan, to be able to prioritize different strategic initiatives, so figure out which ones are going to have the most impact, to be able to measure and manage progress against those goals, and then have a deeper understanding of the strategic planning process and how it can help your organization. Okay. So a bit about me. I'm a managing partner, as I mentioned, at SME Strategy. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I have a book on entrepreneurship, and I'm a speaker. I speak on strategic planning and entrepreneurship. I'm a passionate soccer fan. I just came back from France. I was in there for Euro 2016. And then I've watched a baseball game in 7 of 30 MLB stadiums. So one of my life goals is to visit every Major League Baseball stadium. I just like it. I think it's like a cool experience. So, and being in Canada, which is where I'm recording this webinar from, we only have one major league team now. So it's opportunities for travel. So it's excellent. And then I started SME Strategy to help business owners with the things that they don't know. Really, it's as an entrepreneur, you're so busy working through things that often it's hard to look up and see what's around the corner. I got ripped off by a business partner. And after that, my purpose was to help other entrepreneurs with that. And then it's since evolved and grown into helping larger organizations, typically under 250 employees, as well as nonprofits. And I like helping nonprofits because I help them have greater impact. And really, I love working with teams, just like you guys, to be able to help your team achieve more. So that's why I do what I do, and that's a bit about me. And that's all you'll hear about me for today. So what are strategic priorities? Let's get right into it. They're overarching activities that help guide your team with your everyday activities and additional responsibilities. What does that mean? You have the things that you do every day to run your business. Right now, you're at a current state and you have to do X, Y activities to maintain where you're at. When we talk about additional responsibilities, is presumably you want to grow more or do more, have more impact. You don't want status quo. So when we talk about strategic priorities, it's what is most important in addition to the work you're doing right now just to maintain. Okay, so we're in agreement that your team is already full of things. There are not a lot of people. You're good at using your people. So they don't have a lot of extra bandwidth to do too many extra things. So what we're focusing on today is how do we prioritize to help you achieve better strategic direction. So why are strategic priorities important? They make your strategy easy to understand and communicate to your team and your stakeholders. That's why they're important. If you don't have strategic priorities, then you're just spewing your entire corporate strategy, which is hard to understand and get everybody on the same page for. So one way I relate it, and we'll just sort of frame this to make it simple right now, is New Year's resolutions. I'm going to drink less. I'm going to eat more. I'm going to eat more or drink less. I'm going to work out. I'm going to spend more time with my friends. Those type of things. They're so easy to understand, but it doesn't really go into the how and why you're doing it. It doesn't really matter how and why. It's just we're communicating it in a way that's easy to understand. So when we talk about people, you have to communicate your strategy to your entire organization. If you're a public company or if you have investors, you need for them to understand simply, quickly, and easily why you're doing something and what you're going to do. So that's why strategic priorities are important. So I'm going to mention a small caveat. This is part of a process. Okay, so strategic priorities don't just sit on their own. At SME Strategy, we use a proprietary process called aligned strategy development, which I'll talk a bit more about later. Creating and identifying priorities is part of a holistic process to create and implement on a strategic plan. Use any methodology you want. Okay, there's a lot of great strategic planning methodologies. I didn't invent any of them except for this one. They've been around way longer than me. They'll be around way long after. This is just the way we do things, and we find it works. If it works for you, do it. And with everything that we share on SME Strategy within this webinar, take it for what it is, use it, don't use it, take the best parts, leave the rest. As long as you get your plan done and you move forward, it's all that matters. Okay, first part, look at the vision and the mission of your organization. So as we mentioned, there's a process for all of this. If you've downloaded the 2-day sample agenda, you can see where this fits in. But the question you should ask yourself is, what's going to make the biggest impact towards accomplishing your mission and your vision? What is going to have the biggest impact on you accomplishing your vision and mission? And so many organizations lose sight of this and say, oh yeah, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Is it going to move you forward in accomplishing your mission or purpose and the vision that you have for your organization? If not, don't do it, is what I say, okay? So there's no sense in doing strategic priorities without a solid vision and mission. So this is the framework that we use, and it's easy to understand and represent. Your vision is what guides you at the top here. Your mission is your purpose. And then we're going to focus today on our objectives or strategic priorities. Okay? Strategies and tactics are the things that you do to accomplish your objectives, and your objectives help you accomplish your mission and accomplish your vision. The only other caveat I'll add is that if you're a nonprofit or a mission-based organization, then your mission probably supersedes your vision. Okay? But for the sake of this webinar, this is what we're going to talk about. Okay? Your objectives need to fulfill your mission, fulfill your vision. So you can break up the process into pieces, but it's not going to be effective as if you do a whole strategic planning process in one go. Okay? Everybody has a different approach, as I mentioned. Some people like to do 2-day offsites. Some people do small scrums every day. Some people have big corporate retreats, quarterly, daily, whatever works. But it's important that you use it aligned with the vision and mission. So we're clear on this. By the way, if there's anybody who can't hear me online, just shoot a message and I'll take a look up. I will answer any questions you have after. So what's the first part of the process to, you have your vision, you have your mission. Now, how do you figure out your objectives? First step for us is we do a SWOT, okay? So looking internally, saying what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Organization, you need to know where you stand in very real terms. The reason we like doing this as part of offsites and part of management teams is as an opportunity to be really upfront about where the organization is. Because right now we're building the strategy on a platform of truth. And if you're not honest with yourself as to where your strengths and weaknesses are, you're not going to build a good strategy. So take the time to look at what your strengths and weaknesses are right away. Next, take a look at the opportunities and threats that face your organization. Strengths and weaknesses are typically internal. Opportunities and threats are typically driven from external factors. Now, the opportunities will be the first indication of strategic priorities, because now you're starting to see what's out there for your organization. The threats are also going to give you an indication as to what you might need to shore up in order to take that next step. Again, we've established that where you look at your SWOT, your strengths and weaknesses, and you look at where you're at currently as far as your mission and vision, that's the baseline that you set the trajectory for your strategy. Once you look internally and externally, then you're going to know, okay, where are we really at and where do we want to go in the future? Again, looking at the vision. So first step, do an honest strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and assessment. Now, here's the next step. We use an acronym called PESTLE. There's some call it STEEPLE. What's most important is looking at the trends in your industry and in the world around you. Again, we established that your organization acts in itself as an organism, but it's an organism inside of a larger environment. So if you're going to be planning for what your team needs to do over the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 20 years, 50 years, having an idea of what the future holds is extremely important. So what does PESTLE mean? We're going to look at trends. What does your team think is happening in the future? What are some uncertainties? So for example, political uncertainties. Right now we're right in the middle of the Republican-Democrat election. Again, there's going to be a lot in the future. What effect does that have on your business? What effect does that have on your organization? And what might happen in the future? Economical. What's happening in the economy now and in the future that might have an impact on your business? Again, these trends and your management team's ability to predict the future or make the best guesses about the future is going to shape the direction that you think you want to take your business in. If you think the world is going on an economic downturn, then the decisions that you make around capital investments might be different than if the world is going on an upswing. If in social terms, if people are moving consumer preferences one way, then you might invest in a different product line than if it's going another way, just as an example. So trends, we have political, economic, social. What are people doing? What are the trends in consumer behavior, consumer preferences? And again, these are guesses, but that's what makes strategy a bit challenging, is that you don't really know, you're just making best guesses. What are trends in technology? We talk right now about wearable technology, talk about mobile phones, talk about computer processing getting cheaper, those types of things. So what impact does that have on your organization? What might it do to your organization in the future? Legal, are there any changes in laws? Look at decriminalization of marijuana in many states, and among a slew of other law changes that might happen in the future. But what effect is that going to have on your business or your organization in the future? Oh, and it looks like I wrote economical twice, so I apologize for that. One of them should be environmental. Whichever E you want should be environmental. So climate change, is that affecting how you do business? In short, really. But all of these things are going to go together to contribute to how you build your strategy and how you assess what priorities are the most important. Okay, so we're going back to that strategic planning pyramid, and this is what we use at SME Strategy. So this is our strategic planning map. We have our vision. Where's the future of your organization? We have your mission. What is the purpose of your organization? Why do you exist, and who do you do it for? And then we have them laid out like this. Is that what are the goals that you have for your organization? And how do those goals contribute to your mission, contribute to your vision? And then we're not going to worry about specific objectives and initiatives because those are specific to your organization. Okay, but right now we're just going to focus on the goals and how they contribute. So let's get into the meat of it. How do you determine the best strategic priorities? So we've already looked at your mission, your vision. We've looked at your SWOT, so you know where your strengths are, you know where your weaknesses are. We encourage you to build a strategy based on your strengths instead of your weaknesses. You've identified some opportunities for your organization, as well as some threats, some risk, and some roadblocks. And then you've looked at the trends that are going on, not only in your business, but in the world around you. So what's next? Now it's time to determine the strategic priorities. So what do people care about? Ask them. So when I say people, and I know you're reading ahead, so run a survey, brainstorm with teams, create a culture of sharing, strategic planning offsite. Okay, we're good. When we talk about people, people include your staff, people include your stakeholders, people include you, if you're a president, CEO, managing director, or anybody else on the leadership team, and people are the leadership team or your board of directors. They're all people, okay? But it's people that guide the direction of your organization. So strategic priorities come out of people. You'll get data from a lot of sources, but it's the people that assimilate that data. So how do you know what they care about? How do you know what they think is important? You ask them. It seems very, very simple and maybe oversimplified, but the only way to get information from people is to ask. Okay, so what we do before any strategic planning engagement, we run a survey with not only the leadership team, but with the employees, because they're the ones on the ground implementing the strategy on a day-to-day basis. So from the top down and bottom up, we run a survey. You can brainstorm within your teams. So it depends on how you approach strategy. If you do it once a year, once every 3 years, or every day, but brainstorm with people to understand where those threats are, where are those opportunities, what are the trends, and then start pulling from them what's important as far as strategic priorities. Create a culture of sharing. So that's if you have a high organizational efficiency when they talk a lot, then you can pull out strategic priorities all the time. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to act on them right away, but you start to check the pulse and get an indication of what's important as part of your team. And finally, what we find to be most effective is doing a strategic planning offsite. Obviously, we lead them, so that's why we like them. But a planning offsite is really an opportunity to get your organization outside of the day-to-day activities to think of these strategic priorities and what's most important moving forward. Here are some of the questions that we ask as part of this process. We have a whole big survey, but two that are really useful for us is, if you could pick one goal or target for us to hit over the next 12 to 24 months, what would it be? If you had pick one goal or target for us to hit over the next 12 to 24 months, what would it be? Okay, and it just gives you an indication of where people's heads are at. Because if you have somebody you ask in marketing, marketing might have a marketing objective. HR might have an HR objective. Operations has one. Accounting, whoever you talk to, they have their own preferences. But then you start to, the more data points you have, the clearer picture you have of what your organization cares about and where the opportunities really lie. Another one to get more granular in it is, if you had 3 wishes that would make your job better, make the company run better, what would they be? So when we facilitate strategic planning, we make the experience fun, because corporate planning can be a little dry. And I don't know if you can tell, I try not to be a dry person, so I hope you're still enjoying this webinar. But we say, hey, if you had 3 wishes, be creative. You know, what opportunities exist out there? You're the one doing the work every day. Tell us what we don't see. Because you can't always make strategy from the top looking down, because it's these guys at the bottom that are talking with customers, that are putting things together, that really know the challenges with your organization. So 2 questions that we ask, in addition to soliciting information from the SWOT and from the trends. Okay. The important side note that I've alluded to before, your organization is made up of people. Are you managing them, leading them, or working with them? And you can take some time to look at your own strategy and see how you approach strategy. But the organizations now, we look at tech specifically, and the way management is changing. Management hierarchies aren't as effective as they once were, mainly because young people, millennials, expect to work differently. You also have things like remote teams and things that are changing. And you got to realize that people are really wanting satisfaction and fulfillment in their jobs, but they're the ones doing the work. So if you can get them on board with your strategy and make them feel like they're part of it, you're going to get more out of your people, and your organization is going to be more successful. They hold the key to the success of all of your plans. So don't forget that there's people that are behind the strategy that you're creating. It's not just numbers, it's human beings. Okay, so let's pull it all together here. Based on your SWOT, trends, and direction and guidance, what are some of the priorities that are going to move the needle on your organization? When I say move the needle, picture a gas gauge from 0 to 100% or from empty to full. You have your mission and your vision. What can you do that's going to get you closer to where you want to go? That's all we're worried about. How can we move the needle? How can we have the impact? How can we create success for ourselves? So how do you prioritize? So take a step back. At this point, we've solicited a bit of insights as to where the strategy can go, some ideas on strategic priorities. People are just going to say them, hey, let's invest in this. Let's focus on customers. I'll go over that a little bit, but we've already got a small indication of what those are. So how do you prioritize? Right now, you've got a brainstormed list. So a few ways. A dotmocracy. Now, this is a, like little Post-it, and you can ask your team with these dots, which ones do you think are our 3 most important priorities? Okay. Now, however you choose to do that, the other way is, hey, you have $1,000 to invest fake money into one of these priorities. Where would you put your money? But you'll see really where people put their money where their mouth is. What is really going to help the organization? You can do a cost-benefit analysis if you're really getting into the weeds of what is one going to do with the other. But usually in these types of planning situations, at a high level what's going to have an impact on your organization. And you won't suggest it if it's not up there. If you've got 10 or 15 priorities, most of the time it's not going to come down to a cost-benefit analysis or a real formal cost-benefit analysis to figure out what you need to do. Because you're a room full of experts that know your business more than anybody else. You live it, you breathe it every single day. So the expertise and the dotmocracy, the basically agreeing on what's going to happen, is going to usually supersede this cost benefit, but they're both important. So strategy is art and science. Prioritization is the hard part of strategy, because you don't know right away which one's going to have the biggest impact, and you don't know which one's actually going to work, because it's up to people to implement it. But all you can do as a leadership team is create this strategy and help your people achieve it. And so prioritization is one of those steps, and we'll talk about how to do that after. So we're going to go into the next step of prioritization, which is measurement. Okay, so at this point, you've probably got a bunch of strategic priorities. You've distilled them into some that are more or less important. So best practice for us, as we indicated earlier, 3 strategic priorities. Okay, if you have too many priorities, there'll be a slide that says that later. It's in the wrong place. But if you have too many priorities, you don't have any. It's hard for your people to understand, and it's hard for them to figure it out. So, question you can ask yourself. And again, if you downloaded our 15 questions, this is one of them. What other measures would contribute to that larger goal? So if you could think of other objectives that would move that needle on that important goal, that high arching goal, what would they be? Okay, so think of it this way. We have our strategic priorities. Now we need to start measuring them. So question to ask your team is, if you could choose one measure that would have the most impact on the achievement of that vision, what would it be? So this is what we use. We have at the top, we showed that pyramid, the objective, and it's just stated as what we're doing. Losing weight, working better with customers, improving our IT infrastructure, creating better leadership. And then we're going to talk about measurement. And a good way to think of measurement is going from X, which is your current state, Y, which is your future state, by a date. Okay, and we're going to talk about balanced scorecard shortly, so I'll explain this in better detail. Question to ask yourself when you're coming up with these measurements: can everyone in the organization contribute to this measure? Can everybody in the organization contribute to this measure? So if you're saying we want to improve customer satisfaction, there's some people on the phone who deal with customers all day. Yes, they can improve customer satisfaction. But what about somebody who is a developer? How can he contribute to that customer satisfaction goal? How can somebody put the packages together on the loading bay? How can he contribute to that goal? So things to think about when you're creating these strategic plans and creating these strategic priorities is getting everybody on the same page as far as what you're doing. So everybody knows, like in sports, as we mentioned earlier, I'm a big sports fan. Everybody has their role, but everybody should be able to contribute to the success of the organization. So if you have a few strategic priorities, it makes it harder. But if you have one overarching priority, everybody knows, okay, this is where we're going, team. This is what we need to do. Okay, So we talked a bit about the balanced scorecard, alluded to it a little bit. I'm not going to get into in depth as to the different categories, but basically they've laid it out into 4 different ways. Financial category. So how do we do with money? A lot of organizations say, okay, we're just going to look at the bottom line. But as I mentioned earlier, there are people as part of your organization. So that's when we talk about learning and growth. How do you support your people? How do you support your systems to help them grow and build up? Internal business processes. How do you move widget from point A to point B as fast as possible? How can we improve how our business runs? Those type of goals. And I'll give you some examples after. And then customers. We talked about customer satisfaction, net promoter score. How do we have goals that improve our customer satisfaction? So these are all tied in together because, as you'll see, the learning and growth, let's say you send your people to a strategic planning training, is going to help your business processes, which are in turn going to help your finances. If you send them to customer or sales training, then it's going to make the customer measurement go higher, which at the end of the day is going to improve your finances. And it's all tied into that vision and strategy. Okay, so balanced scorecard. Objectives. When we talk about prioritization, prioritizing the objectives is first. Then measures. How are you going to measure that success? Okay, how are you going to track it? If success was a place, how would you know if you've achieved it? Success was a place, how would you know if you'd achieved it? So how are you going to measure quantifiably the impact and the success of your objectives? Then targets, what's that goal? What's that 100%? What's the fullness of the needle? And then initiatives. Initiatives are just the things that you're going to do to move the needle and achieve those goals. So if one of your goals is to improve customer satisfaction, then your initiatives might be send everybody to sales training, send everybody to customer training, reduce time on the phone, those type of targets. Okay, so objectives, measures, targets, and initiatives. We're all clear on how to use a balanced scorecard. Excellent. So I'm going to open this up right here. So this is on SME strategy. You have, there's an article, it's called Strategic Goals, Examples for Use in Your Strategic Plan. Okay. And here are some of them. So increase customer conversion, become a market leader, attract investment, increase revenues, return on assets, have a bigger shareholders dividend, diversify revenue streams. Okay. So these are just examples of different objectives. Again, see, there's no tracking on them. There's no measurement. They're just examples. Open new locations, build on momentum, increase number of reporting tools, create and implement training programs, balance employee utilization rate, number of exported products. Again, there's no measurement on it. It's up to you to figure out what that is. So if you want to improve customer satisfaction, increase net promoter score, percentage of defaults on products, increase strategic partnerships, decrease strategic partnerships, increase team size, grow through acquisition, improve vendor performance, implement software project. Those are all examples of strategic priorities that you can include as part of your strategic plan. And there's no right or wrong one. The question you should always ask yourself is, are these the things that are going to bring the biggest impact on accomplishing our mission and accomplishing our vision? Okay. So then we talk about measurement. So increase revenue per transaction from X to Y by date. Increase frequency of transactions from X to Y by date. Enter X, Y, Z markets by date. This is a very specific one. 20% market share in each new market, or 20 total regional markets by date. So what I want to convey here is, for different strategic priorities, you can have a dozen different measures. So if it's customer satisfaction, you can gauge customer satisfaction a dozen different ways. What's important is getting everybody aligned on what those are. Email after this. So we talked about the balanced scorecard. We talked about some sample objectives. We talked about some potential measures that you can do it, how you can measure them. And again, it's totally up to you. There's no right way. And then targets, setting an end goal, that X to Y by date, and then initiatives. So here's some best practices on creating KPIs that work. Pushing them on your people versus pulling them from your people. So in my experience, your team is more likely to be engaged with a plan if they were consulted in the process. So from the highest tops of your organization, you can say, oh yeah, excuse me, I'm just going to close this window very quick. You can say, I want you to sell 100 widgets, but they know very realistically that that's not going to happen. But they're never going to tell you. They're going to take your plan, they're going to do their best on it, and then they're not going to hit the markers, or they're not even going to try. And then you're going to wonder why it wasn't successful. So I encourage you, when you're creating these KPIs in your individual business units, pull them from them, ask them what they think instead of just giving it to them, because they're going to feel a lot more bought into the plan, and they're going to feel part of the team. And in a very, very real way, they're going to say, okay, I understand what we're trying to achieve here, and this person wants to hear from what I can actually do. Obviously, you can negotiate on it, but if you just tell them what to do, it's going to be less successful. So what targets are achievable and realistic? So now we have our priorities, we have our tactics. So now, how are you going to actually achieve those priorities? So create a project plan. You have your objectives, your strategies, and tactics. I would encourage you to assign a person, as in a human being, to be responsible for those initiatives. So not a department, because the department will pass the buck as much as they can, only because somebody is responsible for it. It has to stop with a human being. And then don't swim part way. So you're looking at your strategic priorities. If it's really a priority and you build a good project plan out, you need to make sure that you fund it fully. Okay? Because if you picture swimming to an island and you only give them enough resources to swim 70% of the way to the island, what do you think is going to happen? So looking at your priorities and building a proper project plan is going to help you be more successful in them. Okay, so don't swim part way, if you remember that. So another quick recap. We have the vision, we have the mission, your purpose, we have your 3 strategic priorities, and then so these are the actual titles, and then under here are the measurements for each of them. And then you have the specific objectives, the targets, and the initiatives, how you're actually going to achieve them. So one thing that I will remind everyone here is that if you have too many priorities, you don't have any. You can only spend so much time focusing on so many things. So we recommend having 3 or 4 priorities that are really easy to understand for your people. And it's going to make it easier for you to allocate resources, because instead of trying to allocate some resources to a bunch of priorities and spread your money, time, and people like peanut butter a little bit across everywhere, you can really, really focus on nailing the ones that are most important. So when you're building your strategic plan, whether you use a facilitator or not, focus on having a handful of priorities, because it makes it easier to communicate, it makes it easier to understand, and it makes it easier to execute on. And if you have those small amount of priorities aligning with your vision, aligning with your mission, and a way to measure them, you're going to be way, way, way more successful in achieving your strategic plan. So I just really want to make sure that point is, I just want to emphasize that point for you. So 3 or 4 priorities. Once you've met your goals, then move on. Okay, so how do you take actions now? You have your strategic priorities, you know where you want to go, you know how to measure them, you know what you need to do. So get the ball rolling with easy wins. So take your team and plan 30, 60, 90-day targets. Okay, and just figure out, okay, what can we do right away that's going to show everybody that we're accomplishing it? How are we going to get the ball rolling? And then it's going to gain momentum, and people are going to see that things are moving. Again, I mentioned who is responsible for the success of the initiative. I highly encourage you after this, go review the Cotter change model. It's obviously on our website. And it's going to explain an 8-step process on creating change. Because we were asking a bunch of people on SME strategy about what are some of the things that are holding back your strategic plan and actually being able to implement them. A lot of them is getting buy-in. So if people don't like change, because change is hard, and we've already agreed that by doing strategic priorities, you're adding on something new to the everyday. But when you have these targets that you set out and you start getting the ball rolling with easy wins, then people are going to start believing the change and that believing that these things are achievable, and they're going to be, okay, yes, I want to be part of this. I want to be able to contribute to this. And again, that's why it's so important to get people bought into your strategy by asking them what they think is achievable, by asking them where they think the priorities are, by asking them where your company can do better and how their job can be better. So get quick wins, get easy wins in the first 30, 60, 90 days. Figure out a way to move that needle towards accomplishing your objectives, and you're going to be way more successful than if you try to push a strategy on them, if you just wait for a while, and if you leave the responsibility up to a department instead of somebody specific. So one of the last and most important parts of strategic priorities is communication. So I'm going to pop open a window here. So you should be able to see this. Excellent. So this is a Dilbert comic. I didn't want to put it in my slide deck. I think I can actually do this if I just copy it on here. So I'll read it for you. So a hacker broke into our system and found out our corporate strategy. Did he post it on the internet? Because I'd like to read it. I'm also curious about my objectives for this year. Do you guys have the guy's email address? And this was in 1999. And I think it goes to show that there's a lot of people in an organization who still have no idea what your strategic plan is, what their job really contributes to, and how they can have an impact. And if you don't share your strategic priorities, and if you don't share the measurements with your people, then how are they going to know what they're coming to work for, or how they can actually help, or how they can be successful? As I mentioned before, people want to be fulfilled and challenged in their work. But if they just show up and they're like, you just be here, then how do you think that is for them as far as being challenged? So the key to having a successfully implemented strategic plan is communication. So this little diagram, if you look here, being the CEO or the executive director, and let's look at these two levels of people as the management team. And then these are all of their direct reports. Okay, and this is obviously in a hierarchical structure, but you get it. But it's up to the CEO to tell his management team, who are part of the session, to then share the strategic priorities, to share the measurements, to share all of that with the rest of the team, so that everybody knows what it is, so that everybody's on the same page. And that way you're going to have so much more buy-in, and you're going to have much higher success rate as far as execution goes. So I can't emphasize enough how important communication is from the top down, and everybody needs to know what the measurements are and what success looks like. So how do you communicate? You can do it through text. So if you did a strategic planning offsite, you can send everybody an email or internal memo or Slack saying, hey, this is what we met. We met over this and we talked about this. You can do it through audio. You could send a podcast, or however your organization learns. You could send a video, do a YouTube recording. You could actually have a strategy meeting. You could have a town hall, all hands meeting. You could do it in your individual departments. There's a lot of ways you can do it, or other. Whatever makes the most sense for you, do it. But make sure the communication piece doesn't get lost. Because if your strategy sits up top with just your management team, with just the 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 people that were in that offsite, nothing's going to move. So you need to get it out, and frequently. Because you know, people lose attention very quickly. So send it out after you have the meeting, sending out 2 weeks later, have a meeting every day, put it on the wall. That's why you have a lot of organizations that have their vision and mission statement plastered on the wall when you walk in. It's important not to forget what these are. So in summary, look inside and out. Before you do strategic planning, look what's possible for your team right now and look at what's going on outside in the world, because building a strategy in isolation is not a recipe for success. You need to look at what's possible for you and your organization within an environment. Align your priorities with your mission and your vision. If you have strategic priorities that stand on their own, that don't contribute to the future success of your organization, contribute to your purpose, or contribute to the vision of where you want to be, what's the point of having them at all? So when you're doing your planning and you're sorting through your brainstorm of strategic priorities, which ones are going to impact on accomplishing your mission and getting closer to your vision? Make goals that everybody can contribute to. Get everybody bought